Do guns have a place in a house of worship? A new Georgia law passed this year says they do not. But a federal lawsuit filed against the state of Georgia is trying to overturn that law.
The suit is filed by the gun rights group GeorgiaCarry.org and a Baptist minister and his church in Thomaston, Georgia. Georgia, one of only 4 states with an outright ban on guns in churches and other places of worship, along with Arkansas, Mississippi, and North Dakota.
Well, News Edge anchor Tom Haynes has more on a debate that has many Georgians, even gun owners, divided. Tom?
Russ and Amanda, guns and God. A new lawsuit is bringing the issue back into the spotlight. But we're not talking about politics. This time it's people's passions and whether they feel comfortable with guns where they worship.
The fact that there isn't a law that...
Even in local gun shops, the debate rages over whether Georgia should amend current law to allow licensed gun owners to carry firearms into places of worship. Now, you're a gun enthusiast, yet you say certain places, like a place of worship, should be off limits.
When it's something like a church, there's a lot of people there. Everyone's not necessarily prepared to take care of a situation where someone pulls out a gun.
He was one of the only ones at American Classic Marksman in Norcross who felt that way. Most of the gun owners we spoke to say the state shouldn't be in the business of legislating who does what on private property.
Every day when I go to work or wherever I travel, I put on my gun, and I understand that it's a responsibility that I carry with me.
Local gun rights groups are seizing on a recent ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court that limits local government's ability to ban firearms, a move that could make carrying on holy ground fair game.
State law has been amended several times to allow licensed gun owners to carry concealed weapons into places like bars, parks, even parts of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport.
GeorgiaCarry.org, even a Thomaston minister, are suing the state to amend the law once again to allow firearms into sacred spaces, something that's not sitting well at some local churches.
And my worry, personally, about guns in church is that the rate of accidents with guns is very high.
Parishioners at Atlanta's Haygood Methodist worry nothing good can come from a loaded weapon on church property, and tragic church shootings are an example.
If you look at it statistically, it is much more likely that a child will be hurt in an accident in church than that some gun owner will use it legitimately to prevent the murder.
Joining me now to debate the issue is the Reverend Timothy McDonald with the Iconium Baptist Church in Atlanta and John Monroe, attorney for GeorgiaCarry.org. So, Reverend McDonald, you agree with the new law in Georgia that says licensed gun owners should not be allowed to carry concealed weapons inside a place of worship. Why?
Absolutely. I think there ought to be some space that is sacred, some space where there is sanctuary, where families and children even can feel comfortable. And I just don't know how you're going to feel comfortable looking around wondering if somebody has a concealed weapon sitting next to you, and if they just happen to not like my sermon that Sunday, might have other ideas about how to utilize that.
Mr. Monroe, you got to admit a church is a sacred space. If I'm in line for communion, I don't want to have to worry about the guy behind me packing heat, right?
Well, that's not a matter for the state to decide. That's up to the church. There's no reason why the state should be getting involved in things like this, determining that churches should or shouldn't be sacred places or places of sanctuary. That's not for the state to decide. We've got a First Amendment that says so.
So you're okay with churches levying their own rules against parishioners that would say you're not allowed to carry a concealed weapon inside this place of worship?
Absolutely. Churches are private property, and private property owners ought to have the right to determine what happens on their property.
But let's bring this back, Reverend McDonald. I mean, let's look at it this way. You got a government that's now saying you have to have health insurance. We want to run the economy, and we want to take away certain rights to bear arms. You don't have a problem with any of that?
Well, I think that bearing arms, you're talking about life and death, and we cannot put that in the same category as any other law. I mean, guns killed. For anybody who wants to hunt, fine. Anybody who wants to protect their family, their home, fine.
Guns don't kill. People kill. And it's tough to find a statistic that shows that deadly gun violence is linked to licensed gun owners.
Well,
can you find such a statistic?
Particularly if people are sane, if people are normal.
Yeah, Mr. Monroe, nobody's talking about taking away your guns, taking away your rights. I mean, we're talking about churches here. Is no place sacred enough where guns should be off limits in your judgment?
Look, it's not a matter matter whether it's sacred enough or not, and the state has no business determining what's consistent or not consistent with the gospel. I'm really shocked the Reverend would suggest such a thing. We have the First Amendment that guarantees the free exercise of religion. The state ought to be keeping its nose out of what happens in a church.
Reverend McDonald?
Well, I absolutely agree with him on that point. The state should keep its nose out of what goes on in the church and not grant to anyone the right to carry a concealed weapon.
Okay, hang on, gentlemen, just a second. And Reverend McDonald, I want to ask it to you this way. There are a lot of lunatics who would love nothing more than to walk into a packed place of worship and open fire. It's happened time and time again. Are you not more comfortable with a licensed, safe gun owner sitting in those pews able to turn his weapon on this guy?
I'm definitely not, because, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Those who, live by the sword will also die by the sword. We should never make laws based on exceptions.
Mr. Monroe, I want to ask you, where is the compromise here? Because it doesn't sound like there's a lot of bending on either side. So can you find a middle ground?
The middle ground, the state has no business regulating what goes on in a church. I'm surprised a reverend would suggest that. No more than the state can say, you can't wear a pastel dress on Easter Sunday.
All right, Reverend, I'll give you the last word here.
If people cannot worship in their churches, their synagogues, and their mosques without looking over their shoulders, wondering if someone has a concealed weapon, and with a 1 in a million possibility some lunatic might come in, I just don't think that we should make laws based on exceptions. Laws should be based on norm.
All right, it is a lively debate, one that will continue. Reverend Timothy McDonald and John Monroe, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now here's a look at some of the other places where guns are off limits in Georgia: jails and prisons, nuclear power plants, schools, state mental health facilities, and polling places. Licensed owners are allowed to carry guns in state parks, on mass transit, outside airports, at sporting events and political rallies, and inside bars where the owner says it's okay.
So, what's next for the lawsuit to overturn Georgia's law banning guns in churches? Well, now both sides have 30 days to file new briefs, then another 2 weeks to respond, and it's expected the judge could rule on the case by the end of the year. So, what do you think? Should guns be allowed in places of worship? Here are the results of our web poll on myfoxatlanta.com. 82% say yes, 16% say no. And you can still vote. You just go to the homepage and look on the right-hand side.